Number 10. Umibōzu. Some sea legends are terrifying because they attack with teeth or tentacles, but others are more unsettling because they seem to rise out of the ocean in a form that feels almost spiritual, as if the sea itself had briefly chosen a body. Umibōzu belongs to that darker category of maritime fear. In Japanese folklore, it is often described as a vast black humanoid or monk-like figure emerging from the water, appearing suddenly to sailors in conditions of darkness, storm, or open sea unease. That is what gives the legend such enduring force. It does not feel like an ordinary animal hiding in the ocean. It feels like the ocean manifesting a presence. What makes Umibōzu so haunting is its shape. Sea monsters are often frightening because they are radically inhuman, scaled-up fish, serpents, leviathans, or beasts of the deep. Umibōzu disturbs in a different way because it seems just human enough to feel wrong. A giant dark head and form rising from black water creates a very particular kind of fear. The fear that the sea may not only contain life, but intention. Sailors could imagine a whale, a shark, or a serpent, and still remain inside the logic of nature. Umibōzu crosses toward a more supernatural logic, where the surface of the water becomes the threshold through which something watching can emerge. The setting deepens that terror. Open water at night already strips human beings of proportion. There is no reliable scale, no stable horizon, no sheltering landscape to reassure the eye. In such conditions, even a distant shape can feel apocalyptic. A dark, towering figure appearing from the sea in storm or silence becomes more than a sighting. It becomes a judgment. This is why Umibōzu remains so memorable in maritime folklore. It embodies the oldest sailor fear of all, that the sea is not only dangerous, but aware. What keeps Umibōzu haunting is that it represents the ocean as presence rather than habitat. It is not merely a beast that happens to live in water. It is a being that seems born from water itself, from night, weather, and the human terror of being small beneath an endless surface. That is why it survives so well in memory. The legend does not ask whether the deep contains predators. It asks something more disturbing, whether sometimes the sea itself can look back. Number 9. The St. Brendan sea monster. Some maritime legends survive because they were born from fear, but others endure because they emerged inside stories of exploration, faith, and wonder, where the boundary between miracle and danger was already unstable. The St. Brendan sea monster belongs to that older category of ocean mystery. In medieval tradition surrounding St. Brendan the Navigator, one of the most famous episodes tells of the saint and his companions landing on what they believe to be an island, only to discover that the island is actually a gigantic sea creature beneath them. That is what gives the legend such enduring force. It transforms one of the simplest assumptions sailors can make, that solid ground is truly ground, into a terrifying mistake. What makes this story so haunting is the reversal at its center. The ocean is already dangerous when it hides what is below. It becomes more disturbing when it briefly pretends to offer safety, only to reveal that safety itself was alive. That idea is deeply powerful because it touches one of the most primal fears in seafaring: false certainty. A reef can wreck a ship, fog can conceal a coast, and storms can erase direction. But the St. Brendan creature adds something stranger. It suggests that even the act of landfall, the most hopeful moment in a voyage, may conceal a living deception. The legend also survives because it belongs to a world where the sea was still spiritually charged, not just geographically unknown. Medieval ocean narratives often treated distant waters as places where divine mystery, monstrous life, and human faith collided. In that setting, the giant sea creature is not merely an animal. It becomes part of a larger truth about creation, that the ocean contains beings vast enough to humble human certainty, and that voyages through such waters are never only physical journeys. This gives the legend a scale beyond ordinary monster tales. The beast is not just frightening, it is cosmological. What keeps the St. Brendan sea monster haunting is that it expresses one of the oldest maritime insights in legendary form. The sea can deceive not only the eye, but the soul. It can offer what looks like rest and reveal motion. It can appear passive and prove alive. That is why this story still works centuries later. It turns the ocean into a place where even islands may not be islands, and once that possibility enters the imagination, the sailor no longer fears only what swims below. He fears what he has already trusted beneath his feet. Number 8. The Devil's Sea. Some ocean legends endure because they involve a creature, but others become even more unsettling because the sea itself begins to behave like the monster. The Devil's Sea belongs to that darker category of maritime fear. Often associated with waters near Japan and sometimes compared in popular imagination to the Bermuda Triangle, it has survived as a zone of disappearance, strange phenomena, hazardous conditions, and stories of ships or vessels entering a region where ordinary explanations seem to weaken. That is what gives the legend such enduring force. The threat is not one beast rising from below. The threat is an entire stretch of ocean becoming unpredictable enough to feel inhabited by intent. What makes the Devil's Sea so haunting is that it transforms geography into omen. Sailors and travelers can prepare themselves for storms, reefs, or hostile coastlines because these dangers remain within a stable logic. A cursed or anomalous sea zone is frightening in a different way because it attacks the assumption that the water itself is neutral. Once stories accumulate around disappearances, magnetic oddities, violent conditions, volcanic activity, or unexplained losses, the region stops feeling like a passage and starts feeling like a mouth. This is one of the reasons maritime mystery survives so powerfully. The ocean does not need a visible monster if enough ships vanish into a place whose name already sounds like a warning. Its reputation also survives because it exists at the intersection of natural danger and myth-making. The waters around Japan are geologically active, capable of producing genuinely dangerous conditions, and that ecological reality matters. But legends thrive when real hazard and narrative imagination reinforce one another. A rough sea becomes stranger after enough stories are attached to it. Every lost vessel or disrupted voyage begins to feel like confirmation, and the region slowly acquires the emotional architecture of a living threat. That is how the Devil's Sea became more than a difficult body of water. It became a maritime legend of hostile space. What keeps the Devil's Sea haunting is that it represents one of the oldest and deepest human fears about the ocean. Not that something lives under it, but that the sea itself may contain zones where reality becomes unreliable. It survives because it makes navigation feel fragile, not just against weather or creatures, but against place. In such legends, the map no longer reassures, it warns. Number 7. The giant squid. Some sea monsters survive because they remain unproven, but others are more unsettling because they moved from rumor into reality without becoming any less frightening. The giant squid belongs to that rare category of ocean terror. For centuries, sailors described enormous tentacled beings in deep water, creatures later folded into Kraken legends and maritime nightmare. These stories were often dismissed as exaggeration, fear, or confused observation. But what gives the giant squid such enduring power is that the underlying creature turned out to be real. That is what makes it more disturbing than many legends. The old fear was not pure fantasy. It was anchored to an actual animal strange enough to justify it. What makes the giant squid so haunting is the environment to which it belongs. It is not an animal of bright, shallow water or familiar coastal life. It belongs to the deep, to darkness, pressure, and regions of the ocean human beings cannot casually enter. That matters because scale becomes more frightening when it is joined to inaccessibility. A large predator on land can be imagined through footprints, hunts, or direct witness. A giant cephalopod in abyssal water is different. Most of its life occurs in a realm where the human eye does not naturally belong. This allows the creature to remain half-known even after science confirms its existence. Its reputation also endures because its body itself feels almost mythologically designed. Great eyes, long feeding tentacles, grasping arms, pale flesh, and enormous size give the giant squid an alien quality even before any legend is attached to it. It looks like something the sea would invent if it wanted to make the deep feel conscious and strange. That is why direct knowledge has not diminished its power. In fact, confirmed reality has made the older imagination more credible. The ocean really did hide an animal large and bizarre enough to sustain centuries of fear. What keeps the giant squid haunting is that it proves one of the deepest truths behind sea monster mythology. Sometimes the sea does contain creatures so strange that legend only exaggerates what was already waiting there. The giant squid survives because it stands exactly on that border between science and nightmare, where the known world admits, reluctantly, that the old stories were not wrong to fear tentacles in the dark. Number 6. The Bloop. Some ocean mysteries become legendary because sailors claim to see something rise from the water, but others are more unsettling because they began as data, and the data still sounded like a monster. The Bloop belongs to that darker category of modern maritime fear. Recorded in 1997 by underwater listening equipment in the South Pacific, the sound was vast, low frequency, and strange enough to inspire immediate speculation about an enormous living source somewhere in the deep. That is what gave the case its unusual force. It did not begin with folklore, drunken exaggeration, or a silhouette on the horizon. It began with instruments. The modern world listened to the ocean with machines and heard something large enough to make people wonder whether an unknown giant had just spoken in the dark. What makes the Bloop so haunting is the gap between sound and image. The ocean is already terrifying because it hides bodies beneath its surface, but a sound without a visible source creates a different kind of fear. It suggests size without shape, presence without confirmation, and life without anatomy. This is one of the reasons the case spread so quickly into modern sea monster culture. A creature can be dismissed when no evidence exists at all. But when the evidence is real and still does not immediately explain itself, the imagination becomes much harder to contain. The deep sea, more than almost any other environment, turns unknown sound into something primal. Later scientific interpretation pointed toward a natural explanation, most likely an ice-related event such as fracturing or icequake activity, rather than a living beast. On paper, that answer is persuasive. But the emotional structure of the mystery did not disappear with the explanation. In some ways, it became stronger because the Bloop revealed how little psychological distance exists between modern science and ancient sea fear. We can deploy sensors, monitor the abyss, and map enormous parts of the ocean. Yet one strange sound is enough to reactivate the oldest intuition of all, that something vast may still be moving below where we cannot see it. What keeps the Bloop haunting is that it represents a new kind of sea monster legend, one born not from mythic narrative but from technological listening. It survives because it proves that the deep does not need to show a face in order to frighten us. Sometimes it is enough for the ocean to answer with a sound so large, so isolated, and so hard to place that the human mind instinctively builds a creature around it. Number 5, the Ningen. Some sea legends terrify because they involve tentacles, jaws, or impossible scale, but others are more disturbing because they seem to push the ocean toward a shape that is almost human. The Ningen belongs to that darker category of marine fear. Reported in modern Japanese lore as a giant pale humanoid being seen in Antarctic or subantarctic waters, it is often described as ghostly white, enormous, and only vaguely person-like, with a body that seems to float between creature, human distortion, and icebound apparition. That is what gives the legend such enduring force. The Ningen does not feel like a normal sea animal hiding in deep water. It feels like the ocean trying on a human outline and getting it wrong. What makes the Ningen so haunting is the cold setting in which it appears. The polar sea already carries a different kind of terror from tropical or temperate waters. It is emptier, quieter, harsher, and visually stripped down to ice, fog, black water, and pale sky. In that landscape, a gigantic white humanoid shape becomes almost unbearably uncanny. Sharks and squids belong to an ecosystem people already know how to fear. A faceless or barely formed humanoid drifting in freezing water enters a stranger category altogether. It suggests not predation in the ordinary sense, but something like presence, a being too large and too wrong to fit inside marine biology, as people expect it. The legend also survives because it belongs to the internet age while still preserving the old emotional structure of maritime fear. Sightings, stories, and blurry images gave the Ningen a modern afterlife. But the reason it spread is ancient. Human beings are especially disturbed by forms that sit at the border between familiar and alien. A creature that looks entirely monstrous can be filed away as beast. A creature that looks almost like us, but larger, paler, and emptied of ordinary humanity, produces something more intimate. It feels less like an attack from nature and more like a violation of category. What keeps the Ningen haunting is that it represents the sea as a place where not only monsters, but distorted reflections of ourselves might emerge. It survives because the ocean beneath polar night already feels like a realm where normal scale and normal life have thinned. In such a place, a giant white humanoid no longer seems like mere absurdity. It feels like exactly the sort of impossible thing the sea would reveal only where almost no one is there to see it clearly. Number 4. The sea serpent of Gloucester. Some maritime legends endure because they belong to ancient myth, but others are more unsettling because they appeared in a world already moving toward newspapers, eyewitness culture, and modern skepticism. The sea serpent of Gloucester belongs to that second category of ocean fear. Reported off the coast of Massachusetts in the early 19th century, the creature was described by multiple witnesses as a long, unnatural serpent-like being moving through the water with a body too extended, too deliberate, and too strange to fit comfortably within known marine life. That is what gave the case such enduring force. It did not come from some remote legendary ocean alone. It seemed to appear near a real harbour before real people, in waters familiar enough that the sighting felt like an intrusion into the ordinary world. What makes the Gloucester serpent so haunting is the setting. Harbours are supposed to represent return, trade, and recognition, places where ships re-enter the human world after exposure to open sea. Once a sea monster enters that space, the emotional order changes completely. The water near shore becomes as uncertain as the deep. This is one of the reasons the Gloucester sightings remain so powerful. A serpent on the distant horizon belongs to old sailor fear. A serpent moving near the edges of community and commerce feels like something worse because it suggests the unknown has crossed into a zone people believed they understood. The reports also survived because they occupied the unstable border between witness testimony and collective imagination. Fishermen, sailors, and coastal observers were not expected to be easily fooled by every ripple, and that gave the sightings a certain credibility. At the same time, once a region begins looking for a monster, the threshold for seeing one can drop quickly. That ambiguity is central to the case. The Gloucester serpent did not need perfect evidence to become memorable. It needed only enough repeated description to create a shape that history could keep returning to, one long enough, strange enough, and public enough to resist complete dismissal. What keeps the sea serpent of Gloucester haunting is that it expresses one of the purest truths about ocean legend. Familiarity does not neutralize the sea. Even in waters worked, mapped, and watched by human beings, the surface can still produce forms that make the world feel less stable. The Gloucester serpent survives because it turned a harbour into a place of old fear again, and once a coastline has hosted something like that in the imagination, it never fully returns to innocence. Number 3. The Lusca. Some sea monsters terrify because they move through open water, but others are more disturbing because they are tied to places that already feel like mouths into another world. The Lusca belongs to that darker category of marine fear. Said to haunt the blue holes and underwater cave systems of the Bahamas, it is often imagined as a gigantic octopus, squid-like predator, or hybrid tentacled beast lurking in shafts of water that descend far below visible depth. That is what gives the legend such enduring force. The Lusca does not need the whole ocean in order to frighten. It needs only one opening deep enough to feel bottomless. What makes the Lusca so haunting is the environment attached to it. Blue holes are naturally beautiful from above, clear, calm, and almost inviting, but beneath that beauty lies the terror that defines the legend. Vertical depth, submerged caves, darkness, sudden drop-offs, and enclosed underwater passages create exactly the kind of setting in which the imagination expects something to wait. This is why the Lusca survives so well in maritime folklore. It fuses creature and place perfectly. The monster does not feel added to the landscape. It feels born from it. The legend also draws power from the way real danger supports it. Dangerous currents, underwater entrapment, cave disorientation, sharks, and large marine life already make such environments genuinely hazardous. That matters because the most durable legends often grow where fear is already justified. A place does not need a confirmed monster in order to produce monster stories. It only needs enough silence, depth, and risk that the human mind begins assigning agency to the danger. In the case of the Lusca, that agency took the form of a hidden tentacled predator, something powerful enough to seize, pull, and vanish into water where sunlight cannot follow. What keeps the Lusca haunting is that it represents one of the most intimate ocean fears of all. Not being hunted across distance, but being taken downward into a confined and unknowable depth. It survives because it turns paradise into camouflage, clear tropical water into a trap, and a beautiful opening in the sea into the suggestion of a living throat. Number 2. The Leviathan. Some sea monsters survive because sailors claim to see them, but others survive because they were never meant to be only animals. The Leviathan is more disturbing than an ordinary ocean beast because it emerged from a world where the sea was not just dangerous, but sacred, chaotic, and morally charged. In biblical and near-biblical imagination, Leviathan was not simply a large creature hidden somewhere beneath the waves. It was a being bound up with cosmic fear, divine power, and the terrifying idea that the deep contained forces no human strength could challenge. That is what gave the Leviathan such enduring power. It was not merely a monster in the water, it was a symbol of the sea as something vast, untamable, and older than human order itself. That symbolic depth is what keeps the legend alive even now. A great many creatures in folklore are frightening because they threaten the body, but Leviathan threatens something larger. It represents the possibility that nature contains forms of power so immense that they seem almost theological, as though the ocean itself had a will, a body, and a rage. Across centuries, the image shifted. Sometimes Leviathan appeared as a colossal serpent, sometimes as a dragon-like beast, sometimes as an unimaginable sea creature of overwhelming scale. But the exact anatomy mattered less than the emotional truth beneath it. Human beings looked into the sea and felt that its size, violence, and secrecy needed a face, and Leviathan became one of the greatest faces ever given to that fear. Modern readers often encounter Leviathan as myth, scripture, literature, or metaphor, and from that perspective it can seem safely distant. But that distance is deceptive. The deeper reason the legend survives is that the ocean still produces the same psychological conditions that gave birth to it. A storm at sea still feels less like weather than judgment. A dark horizon still feels less like geography than exposure. The discovery of enormous marine creatures, the sound of unseen life beneath a ship, the knowledge of trenches and black depths beyond sunlight. All of these continue to nourish the same intuition that made Leviathan convincing in the first place. Even when belief changes, the emotional architecture remains intact. What makes Leviathan so haunting is that it stands at the point where sea monster, sacred terror, and cosmic scale converge. It is not frightening only because it might crush a vessel or devour a man. It is frightening because it suggests that the deep is not merely populated, but governed by forms of existence fundamentally beyond our proportion. In that sense, Leviathan is more than one legend among many. It is one of the greatest expressions of the oldest ocean fear of all, the fear that beneath the surface lies not only life, but power, and that human beings crossing the sea are never masters of that realm, only tolerated intruders above a darkness they cannot command. Number 1. The Kraken. Some sea legends are ancient, some are symbolic, and some are terrifying because they seem to gather every deep-water fear into one monstrous form. The Kraken stands at number 1 because no other ocean legend has so perfectly fused scale, violence, mystery, and endurance. Born from Scandinavian tradition and later magnified through sailors' tales, natural history confusion, literature, and maritime dread, the Kraken became the ultimate image of a creature rising from below to overwhelm the fragile human world above. It was imagined as colossal, tentacled, abyssal, and powerful enough to seize ships, drag men into the sea, and turn the open ocean into a battlefield between human survival and something vast enough to make the ship itself feel small. That is what gave the Kraken unmatched power. It did not merely inhabit the ocean. It made the ocean feel inhabited by intention. The Kraken's strength as a legend came from how well it fit the sea's most disturbing logic. The ocean does not only hide predators, it hides dimension. A storm can be seen, a reef can be charted, but a giant creature below the surface exists in a different category of fear because it combines invisibility with sudden force. The Kraken was terrifying not only when imagined attacking, but when imagined waiting. A calm patch of sea, a whirl in the water, a dark mass moving below a hull, these small signs became enough to trigger the idea that something immense might already be under the ship. That psychological mechanism matters because the best monsters are not frightening only when visible. They are frightening because they teach people how to reinterpret emptiness itself. Part of the Kraken's endurance also comes from its strange relationship with reality. As knowledge of giant squid and other deep-sea life expanded, the legend did not disappear. It adapted. The more humanity learned that the deep really did contain enormous tentacled animals once thought nearly mythical, the less foolish the old fear seemed. The Kraken may never have existed in the exact form of legend, but reality did something almost as powerful. It confirmed that the ocean was capable of hiding creatures bizarre and massive enough to justify generations of terror. In that sense, the Kraken survived because science did not erase the abyss. It gave the abyss new credibility. What makes the Kraken worthy of the number 1 place is that it remains the purest monster the ocean ever produced in human imagination. It is at once beast, catastrophe, and embodiment of depth. It turns the sea from an environment into an adversary, from a root into a mouth, from a surface into a warning. More than any other legend on this list, the Kraken endures because it still feels plausible at the emotional level, even in an age of research vessels, deep-sea cameras, sonar, and marine biology. We know more than earlier centuries did, and yet the deep is still so enormous, so dark, and so little lived in by human beings that the old image remains powerful. Something vast below. Tentacles rising. The ship pulled down, men disappearing into black water. The Kraken refused to die because the ocean has never stopped giving human beings a reason to believe that somewhere beneath the surface, enormity is still waiting.